Are we starting? Or
I'm waiting for the live to start on Facebook.
Okay, fine.
But we are, yes. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this online event organized by the Martin Center in cooperation with the Konstantinos Karamanlis Institute for Democracy. We apologize for the slight delay, but due to the level of our speakers, they had to tend to some very important business. Therefore, we are sorry that we kept you waiting. My name is Anna Nalivaiko, and I'm the project officer at the Martin Center, and I have the pleasure of moderating this discussion today, which will last for an hour. And we're going to discuss the very delicate topic of migration and the geopolitical challenges for Europe in Eastern Mediterranean. I am joined by three excellent speakers. First of all, the alternate Minister for Migration and Asylum Policy of Greece, George Koumoutsakos. Then the Secretary General of the European People's Party, MEP, and Secretary Treasurer of the Martin Center, Antonio Lopez Isturiz-White. And last but by no means least, the Vice President of the German Marshall Fund of the United States and the Executive Director of its Brussels office, Ian Lesser. So welcome, speakers, and thank you very much for taking the time to be here today with us and discuss this important topic. Just a small announcement to our online viewers. If you'd like to ask any questions, please leave them in the comment section underneath the live stream video, and we will do our best in addressing as many of them as we can. So without further delay, I'd like to dive right into our discussion. Due to the coronavirus outbreak, of course, in Europe, all of the media attention has been understandably focusing on this crisis management. However, just over slightly a month ago, we were all watching another crisis unfold at the borders of the external borders of the European Union. In fact, at the end of February, the Turkish president declared that the land border between Turkey and Greece was open, and he encouraged thousands of migrants and refugees to illegally cross into the EU, therefore breaking and violating the EU-Turkey deal that was signed in 2016. So the opening of the border has seen thousands of people gathered at the frontier in Evros. This was just one of the last moves of President Erdogan, who has been behaving more and more aggressively in the region. So, Minister, I'd like to address you first with the following question. Would you give us a brief overview of how Greece reacted to this move of Turkey of opening the borders, and maybe how the EU responded to this move as well? So, Minister, I'll give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Chair. For first of all, I have to stress how important is this event. It's a very timely, a substantial event, and I would like to congratulate the Karamanlis Institute for Democracy and the Martin Center. It's a great honor to be part of this effort and to come together with other distinguished speakers, and I dare to say good friends from my time in Brussels. So thank you very much once again. As far as the issue that you raised, Anna, indeed, it was during this last month that Europe faced an orchestrated policy of, I would say, blackmailing by Turkey. Ankara purposely pushed desperate people towards its borders with the EU, with the aim to force them to violate massively its borders with the EU and the border with Greece, with no consideration whatsoever for the safety of those people. Greece had no other choice than to protect its borders, which are at the same time the EU borders, assuming its full responsibility of tackling what we call a hybrid threat. The support we received, as from the outset, by European institutions and by member states, enhanced our determination and resolve. But that was not only a fight on the ground, since we had to face at the same time, in parallel, a coordinated campaign of fake news and propaganda, which could be orchestrated only by knowledgeable and experienced state actors. This attempt to blackmail Europe through Greece failed. And today the situation has changed. Calm has been restored in our borders. And let me express a hope. I hope that this could last. But I fear that Turkey has not abandoned its strategy. Why I'm saying this? Because 2 weeks ago or less, we had some statements coming from the Minister of Interior of Turkey, Mr. Soylu, who said that once the crisis of the pandemic is over, these people will come once again, will go back to the borders. You know, I do believe that not only Greece, but all partners should take seriously into consideration this kind of statements coming from the Turkish leaders. Believe me, this is not our understanding of the situation does not result from the traditional difficult relations we have with Turkey. I think that this is an objective conclusion because, and I will stop here, you know, I remember it was the first week of our government having assumed the power in Greece, when there was a statement coming from Mr. Soylu once again. It was on the 21st of July 2019. In this statement, the Turkish Minister of Interior, who happens to be a strong person in the system of leadership in Turkey, said that if Turkey opens the floodgates of migration, no European government could last more than 6 months. So in a sense, what happened in February, in March, has already been announced by Ankara. And I can confirm to you that that was my conclusion, my personal conclusion, when I first met with Mr. Soylu in Ankara. Because, and this is the last point that I would like to make, I have met with Soylu and his deputy minister 3 times since we took office in Greece. That means almost once per 2.5 months. And I have to tell you that all the meetings came after Greek initiative, because we wanted to engage them in a fruitful dialogue on how to deal with this common challenge of migration and illegal migration. What happened, in a sense, was frankly pre-announced by Ankara.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minister, for those opening remarks. And in fact, you pointed out the importance of dialogue. And in this case, I think what is also very important is to take into account solidarity. And EU has definitely demonstrated that, I think, with regard to this crisis management. So I just have a follow-up question for you. The EU leaders stated that there is a need for a new pact on migration and asylum. So as someone who is, on the front line dealing with this crisis, and someone coming from a country which has been a shield to the EU now, how do you think this new pact should look like, especially with respect to solidarity and maybe burden sharing?
Thank you for your question, which gives me the opportunity to complete my initial answer, my previous answer, by referring to the EU-Turkey joint statement of 2016, which is a joint statement dealing with the migration challenge and how we can be more effective, us, Europeans and Turkey. I think the policy that Turkey led last month violated this joint statement. I don't think to believe that this joint statement, this agreement is dead, because it's the only instrument that we have in our hands to deal with this challenge. So we do believe that we should go back to this statement of 2016. We consider it, of course, seriously wounded by the policy of Turkey, but still alive. And we believe that it should be enhanced. And we have suggested 3 ways to enhance this statement. First of all, probably we should seriously consider the possibility of a reinforced mandate for Frontex, so that joint operations between Frontex and the relevant Turkish authorities can take place along the Turkish shores, the Turkish coast, and in Turkish territory. If Turkey agrees in such an arrangement, I think that this would be a very strong signal that Ankara has decided to be more cooperative, and they are decided to create the necessary confidence that we need in Brussels and in Ankara to deal in a coordinated way with the migration challenge. Second point is that we need to leave behind the geographical restriction that exists right now. That means that you can have returns from those who do not have the right to asylum. We have returns now to Turkey, but only from those in the Greek islands. We believe that if we extend this to those in the mainland, this would enhance the effectiveness of the agreement. And final point, we do believe that Turkey needs our understanding and support to deal with the challenge of the millions of refugees in her territory. We should acknowledge this reality, and we should provide for funding for them. But this funding cannot be without any agreed conditions or prerequisites. And that's why we believe that the system of more for less could be the solution. That means more funding for less flows, or less in no funding if we have increased flows. So I leave these ideas for the discussion as far as the joint EU-Turkey statement is concerned. Now going to the European Pact for Migration and Asylum, I think it is of vital importance for Europe to come to an agreed migration and asylum policy. I fully understand, and we all understand, because we know how things are, that this will be a difficult and a complicated negotiation, because I see 3 groups of countries participating in this negotiation for a European migration pact. First is the frontline countries, like Spain, Tono knows very well, Italy, Malta, Greece, Cyprus. Countries that they would like to see a full implementation of the solidarity principle. That means the distribution, a fair distribution of the burden to all member states. The second group of countries is, let's say, the destination countries of destination like France, Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, that happen to be as well old, committed, pro-European member countries. This group of countries believe in the principle of solidarity, but not as the frontline countries see this solidarity to be implemented. So there is a certain divergence of views. And the third group is the Visegrad countries, that they don't believe in this kind of solidarity, and they are not ready to accept this principle. So you understand that this is a rather complicated negotiating environment. But I do believe that we should come to an agreement at the end of the day, irrespective, notwithstanding the difficulties, and the new pact should be based on a balanced and functional relationship between the two fundamental principles of shared responsibility and effective solidarity. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Minister. You definitely provided a lot of food for thought, and the two key words that were used here and that I think will be used throughout the whole discussion is burden sharing, shared responsibility, and solidarity. So, Secretary General Tono, I'd like to turn to you now and ask you, so besides being the Secretary General of the EPP, as the Minister mentioned, you're also MEP from Spain, a country which itself has been much affected by great waves of migration. So, and also in its support to Greece, the EPP stated the importance of reforming the Dublin process. And my question to you is, how do you see, what direction should this reform take? So, Tono, floors is yours. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. First of all, Anna and viewers, it's very difficult in politics when you speak second to a friend, which we have shared many years ideologically and also good friendship, because an expert, because it leaves you without arguments. But I take as mine many of the declarations by George. I will come back to that, specifically in the question of Turkey. I'm sure that we will come back, and I would like to make some stances from the EPP on that. Second, I agree with George. I think that this is a fantastic initiative, both from the Martin Center and from the Konstantinos Karamanlis Institute, because we are proving that, we are at the head, and we are now coordinating the fight against coronavirus after a not so good start. I will come back to this. In the meantime, we cannot forget these kind of things as we are discussing today, because enemies of the European project are still there. They're working every day. They don't like us. They don't like us. They don't like this unity. And if they see that we are not attending these kind of problems, they will soon take profit of that. And I say I will speak about Turkey later on. This crisis, the immigration crisis, started like many crises in the European Union. And some people might see that there is some parallel with what's going on with the coronavirus. It started with a wild, chaotic response from member states. This is classic in European politics. I have lived my 20 years as Secretary General, 19 years as Secretary General of the EPP. I have lived many like that. Then, after 2 weeks, governments realized that coordination is needed. Anna, what you were speaking about, solidarity, suddenly appears, and the demand of coordination. And third, finally, we will find solutions, European solutions, which none of you will hear about because it will not be published. Because unfortunately, positive news concerning the European Union are not so spread and published. Ian, who's in contact with the United States, knows that the press there speaks about the disappearance of the euro of the European Union every morning when they wake up in New York and Washington. Trying always humbly to tell them that this is not the case, but okay, here we are. Here we will continue for whatever reasons, call it solidarity, call it necessity. We need each other. And in the case of the immigration crisis, we need each other. Let me go as Secretary General to the ideological side. I cannot but envy the political change that has happened in Greece. If coronavirus would have been active in Greece with another government, I doubtly serious that the reaction would be like it is today of a government in Greece that is perfectly now dealing with a challenge. Difference from my country, dear George. The actions taken by the government of Kyriakos Mitsotakis are very different from Spain, because now the story has changed. You have a government that is managing the situation, classical center-right government, Nea Democratia, Partido Popular in the past in Spain, we are prepared to do this. The government of Tsipras in the past was not prepared to deal with the utilization of the Turks of this question, was not ready also to tackle the question of the massive flux of immigration. What I'm saying also this is I have the fear that now that we have this government, social communist in Spain, again, the flows of immigrants will now come back from Greece and they will return to come through Spain, like it happened in the past. So yes, there is an ideological dimension in this. Whenever there is a left government, and the one that suffered Greece, like me in Spain, and us in Spain now with these communists, this is a total challenge for the whole European Union in immigration question. We have to be very clear on that. And then when there is a government from the center-right, we are there to arrange things. And the solutions provided by George are the solutions that fortunately also, some of them are already being, I'm sure, will be introduced by another good Greek that we have as Commissioner, Margaritis Sinas, that is now involved with Commissioner Johansson in the creation of this new pact for immigration and asylum. We are very lucky. We are very lucky that in our case, Margaritis is in charge of this. Said so, as again, talking about solidarity, I think that the Dublin process, although well-intentioned, although at the beginning had some, of course, good things, good responses, it has not been in the long term now working as we expect. And I think that this has to be reviewed, and I welcome the initiative by the Commission of Ursula von der Leyen, and as I said, by Martinas and others, to redress this and to create a new path that our government have to respect. One point that I am personally dedicated, for example, in the European Parliament as MEP, the question of minors and accompanied minors. And in the question of immigration, this is a terrible thing that is happening. Due to the lack of coordination between some member states about the information about minors coming, these minors are used by the mafias, not outside the European Union, but inside the European Union, which dedicate these minors for prostitution and other. We cannot allow this to happen. And the coordination and the good work between all of us is needed to prevent that these things happen in Europe, profiting of the tragedy of many people. They're only looking for a living. The question of asylum has also to be clarified, and it's good. George spoke about Frontex. I've been always, as a good Spanish, an advocate of, like the Greeks, of Frontex and reinforcing Frontex. And I think that other member states who feel that they are too far away from this and they don't feel concerned about this, they have also to participate. This is European solidarity. The question of Frontex it is there, and also, as I said, the exchange of information, and no least also the responsibilities of everybody. If some countries might not, maybe, was referred as the mandatory flexible solidarity. These are the kind of words that we sometimes create in the European Union that no one understands. What it means is those countries who are not ready maybe to take asylum seekers, immigrants, they might have to be solidar with other means, financial, maybe infrastructural, but I think that everybody has to be on board. And I applaud, and I am highly proud of this new approach. And I think that we have to be all together in this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tono. You definitely raised a lot of points, and cooperation is one of the key points here. But I'd like to also look at the future of EU-Turkey relations. So as we know, the EU-Turkey deal, it has been violated in a way by Turkey by opening the borders, but it still remains valid. So what future do you see for this deal? And maybe more in general, what future do you see for EU-Turkey relations? Tono, the floor is yours.
The European Union is a democracy with 27 member states. People usually blame us that we are very slow in taking decisions. That's because we take into account everyone's opinion. The opinion of Malta in the European Union is as important as the German opinion, or the Greek opinion is as important as the Finnish or the Spanish. We are surrounded by governments that do not respond to these criteria. A one-man show, unipersonal governments without any control from parliaments, democratic parliaments. This is a worrisome fact that is even creating some attraction from citizens. I'm reading now the book about the end of the Roman Republic and the rise of the empire of Augustus. And let me tell you, so I see sometimes some common, because I love history, I follow history, and I think that history teaches us lessons that we have to learn also for the future. And I am not attracted by these problem solver, miracle workers, regimes. And the question of Turkey is an interesting example. Yes, the European Union has to have a good deal with the Turkey, but the European Union cannot accept any kind of blackmail from any government that is not responding, it's clear, to the same criteria that we have in the European Union. Second, the attitude of the Turkish government has to cease. In what? In the violation of the Greek airspace, in the violation of the Cyprus waters in the oil drilling, and the invasion, of course, of Cyprus. These are things that have to be tackled. I have witnessed during months the efforts of the government of Cyprus to negotiate a solution in Cyprus. And it has always been Turkey who has refused to do so. These are not positive attitudes that could deal to a good arrangement. Also the question of Syria and many others. I think that the Turkish government, instead of this kind of menaces and attempts of blackmailing, what has to do is right now put an end to all these provocations and sit with the European Union to have a deal. That deal is made to alleviate the sufferance of many people, millions of people that are escaping from wars and are not to be used as a bargain chip in negotiations. This is something that we have to have very clear in our future negotiations that I do not reject. We have to have them also with the Turkish, but with this clear condition.
Thank you, Tono. You actually raised many points which help me in the transition to some questions I have prepared for Mr. Lesser. So, indeed, Turkey is using the refugees now for political gains, and it has been behaving more and more aggressively in the region with incursions in the Greek airspace and the illegal oil drilling in Cyprus. So, what do you think? How does this affect the situation in the region, and what do you think is Turkey's end goal? So, Ian, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, Anna, thank you very much. And again, it's really a pleasure to be here with you and also with friends to have this conversation. I mean, these are really very important issues. We're all so focused on the COVID crisis, and it does have influences on this. But in fact, there are many other things going on. And the question you ask, about Turkish assertiveness in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Aegean is something that, we were discussing for the last years. In fact, Turkish foreign policy in different ways has become much more assertive. Sometimes it's in a helpful way, sometimes in a very unhelpful way. And, to me, when I look at this, I really think it has a starting point, in a sense, in Turkish domestic politics, which, like in many places, has become much more nationalistic and sovereignty conscious. And frankly, I think as President Erdogan has, in a way, lost a bit of his traction in pure domestic politics in Turkey. He now faces a real opposition, including some from his own party, or formerly from his own party. He's, in a sense, doubled down on this nationalist card. And there are many opportunities to do it because Turkey is sitting in a very chaotic situation. I don't think the situation in Syria that you refer to is going to be stabilized anytime soon. So Turkey could be facing this, and Europe, in fact, can be facing this for many, many years to come, Turkey's transatlantic partners. So it's a kind of durable chaos. And how is Turkey going to respond to this? It is in many ways lost faith. I would say the Turkish people, Turkish government have lost faith in their alliance relationships at fundamental levels. I think some of that, frankly, is Turkey's own doing. But there it is. We're in a very difficult place where it's hard to work with Turkey on a kind of positive agenda. These are all extremely important issues. I think it's very dangerous because we've seen these kind of episodic brinkmanship, if I can put it that way, in the past, over decades, actually. And sometimes it's come very close to conflict. I think we've been very fortunate. I think, probably the minister would agree with me that, key points over a decade, 20 years really, there has been a kind of core détente between Greece and Turkey that is held despite all of these provocations and everything else, because it was simply too important to leave that aside. But, we have a collection of kind of national hot button issues that Turkey is dealing with. I would say I would agree with the comment that was made by the minister earlier that Antonio also reflected on this, that Turkey has almost 4 million refugees on its territory. And in a sense, they are facing a delayed response to this politically. It was a relatively tolerant environment inside Turkey for many years to this. In some ways, it even helped in a Turkish economy that was doing better. Well, now everyone's under more pressure. And there's a much more polarized atmosphere inside Turkey about migrants, refugees in general. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, Minister, but I think most of the refugees that were beginning to arrive when Turkey unilaterally decided to sort of open the border were not, in fact, from Idlib. In fact, most of them perhaps, were not even Syrian. They were from Afghanistan, South Asia, and elsewhere. So it's a much bigger problem that is at base, it seems to me, political, but we can talk about more aspects of this. I don't think it's about energy, not access to energy resources per se. I think it's about sovereignty, it's about nationalism, it's about this overheated sort of environment. And what I am very concerned about is that, who is going to be helping to moderate this dangerous situation today. And, in 1996, in Ymir Kardak, Richard Holbrooke, was Washington. Well, I don't think that kind of initiative is coming from Washington today, and everybody is terribly distracted. And what sort of environment will we have, a year from now when we're dealing with a full-scale global economic depression? I don't think that's likely to calm things down. So, that's a long answer to your question, but I'm actually very concerned about the conditions we have.
Thank you, Ina. And of course, you mentioned Syria, which cannot be not mentioned in this context. So my follow-up question to you is, what are the real implications of the situation, of the developments in Syria? Are we facing a new wave of migration? And maybe, in your opinion, do you see EU or even NATO taking a more active role in the region?
Well, clearly, if the 2016 agreement with Turkey is not put back on a stable footing, there's going to be the risk of this kind of migration crisis again. I doubt it will have the same contours as it had in years past, because, in fact, there's nowhere really for the migrants to go other than, of course, Greece, who is very, very exposed. Antonio referred to the fact that if the sort of traditional routes into receiving countries are closed, migrants will find other ways to get there. I think in Europe, increasingly, we're going to be focused on not just this situation, but the longer term pressures that are coming from further south in Africa and elsewhere. So, the issue clearly is not going away. I don't think Syria is dangerous for all kinds of reasons. The refugee flow issue is only one of them, frankly, I think. There's also a very dangerous situation in Libya, where also Turkey has become deeply involved, where there's a Russian angle to it and other things which we could talk about. I think, unfortunately, at a time when we need both this EU solidarity, of course, but also maybe more EU activism on the ground, Frontex and other means, everybody is highly distracted with this COVID virus, and it's understandable. NATO is a different sort of political equation. Turkey sits at the table at NATO. I think there was some interest in seeing NATO become more engaged, at least in the maritime security dimension in the Eastern Mediterranean. But again, there are many, many distractions. And I think it's going to be very hard to get NATO to focus on that. And I personally am quite concerned that we don't have the kind of American leadership on these issues that we might have expected in the past. Of course, we have an election coming up as well, and we'll see. But any new American administration is also going to be highly distracted.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Ian, for this very extensive, actually, overview that you gave. I'd like to thank the speakers now for their opening statements, and I see we have a few questions coming in from the online viewers. Therefore, I'd like to address some of them. I have a few selected questions that I will address to one speaker at a time, as I don't think all of the speakers have the time to answer all the questions. And please, if you do have a comment on a question that you were not asked, just raise a hand, and as I see all the speakers, I will give you the floor to intervene as well. I think I'd like to start with the Minister, and a question directed to you by the Martin Center Executive Director Tommy Huhtanen, which asks, how is Turkey's internal situation is reflecting on the situation in the Greek borders and the migration as a whole? So, Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think that the domestic situation is one of the factors that it was behind what happened in our borders 1 month ago. I feel that President Erdogan and his system of power had some they went through some rather difficult moments in crucial issues of foreign policy, like what happened in Idlib, in Syria, in Eastern Mediterranean. I think that they are going through some difficult moments. And they, at the same time, they would like to see some support coming from the West, from EU, on their policies in Syria in particular. This support was not coming from Brussels. And they felt that that was the right time to try to exert some pressure on Brussels through Greece so that they get the diplomatic support that they were looking for. Because they felt that they needed this support so that they could manage to explain to the domestic audience that if we are facing difficult times in Syria, this to a certain extent is because of the Europeans, I would say, Europeans' denial to help us. And this is how we are going to show to them that they have to give a helping hand by using as a battering ram, unfortunately, those people, refugees and migrants. So I guess, and of course, the other reason, very important one, is the situation in Turkey's economy. So both reasons, actually three reasons: domestic situation, economy, and problems in the foreign policy. All these three factors played in favor of the decision of the Ankara to try to blackmail Europe through opening the migration doors. Just one thing that comes from the previous discussion, I think that the solidarity that the European institutions, and I would say the totality of our partners showed to us during the first difficult days of March, it was a very strong signal that Europe, under a moment of pressure, can act in a coordinated way. The presence of the head of the three institutions, Commission, Council, Parliament, and the Presidency in our borders, with the Prime Minister Mitsotakis, didn't have only a value of semantics. Actually, it should be seen, it must be seen as a geopolitical event, because the whole leadership of Europe was there stressing and underlining that the external borders of a member state are at the end of the day European borders. And that was a very strong, important message that should not be underestimated. We have all to stress the importance of that event. Europe can protect its external borders.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister, for that answer. Tono, maybe you can take this one from Dimitris Koutrelakos. Could the immigration problem be a Trojan horse that could in the future be used to further apply the Turkish agenda within the Western Alliance? Thank you.
No. We are slow, we are imperfect in the European Union, but not. At the end, when we react, I always say, this is an example, when I have to do documents of the EPP previous to congresses, I have fantastic professionals here in the EPP. You cannot imagine what is the nightmare to have 51 parties from 27 countries to agree in a document for the Congress of the EPP, to take not only countries, but also regional realities around. But one thing I have always felt is once we have the document and it's approved by everybody, it's bulletproof. It took so much confirmation, so much coordination with so many diverse opinions and characters that at the end, the document is untouchable. I think that, like always, we will remain in our unity and coordination of action concerning the question of Turkey. This is the only way that such a government of Erdogan's will understand. This kind of governments, they only understand about strength. And the strength the European Union will show, but not unjust strength, but our clear, just strength. We have to have the deal, but also in common terms, not imposed by anyone. And I have complete assurance and I have complete guarantees that we have the fullest professional in our governments, in the European Commission, people capable of finding this European position. By the way, I wanted to refer to the comment of George about the photograph, the images which for the European construction were crucial, of the three presidents of the three principal institutions, together with Kyriakos Mitsotakis. But again, I didn't see that this was too mediatic around Europe. I profit the occasion always to say, I want to encourage also the media to publish also this kind of things, because this is very important. I know, it's a positive news. I know, it's difficult to sell, but please, this is very important for our citizens to see this in Finland, in Sweden. It's very important to see that finally in the Greek border, someone is doing something. And that these European institutions are fully backing this government. This is crucial for all of them. So now there will not be a race of extreme right, of populists in their countries profiting the occasion and the misinformation about these kind of things. That was a great thing to see that the European institutions were together with the Greek Prime Minister in the frontier defending the frontier of everybody.
Thank you, Tono. I see, Minister, you have a comment. Please, the floor is yours.
If I may just extremely briefing, I couldn't agree more with the strong statement made by Tono from the Secretary General of EPP. That was a unique event, and its importance goes far beyond the events of that day. It should be seen as a very strong message that when in need, Europe can act together. That's why I said it's not only the semantics of the event, it is something much more. In my understanding and my reading, it was an important geopolitical. It was an event of geopolitical importance. And this is how we should see this event and present it to not only to governments, but to the Europeans all over Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Tono, and also for underlining the fact that there is a much needed positive communication about the EU in the member states instead of always the blame game from the member states towards the EU. Ian, there is a question for you from Panos Kakoliris, which says, are you worried that the coronavirus pandemic will influence the future of Europe and its interest in the wider East Mediterranean? Thank you.
Well, Anna, thank you. Well, there are many reasons to be worried about this crisis that have to do with human security. They have to do with the economic welfare globally and in specific countries. I mean, we're going to be dealing with this problem and its legacy for a very long time to come. There is a problem of distraction, of course. I mean, and I think this exists in Europe, but also on a transatlantic basis. Things can go unnoticed. Actions can take place that should have a diplomatic response, but people are simply too distracted. Yeah, I mean, I've for many years been looking at Mediterranean and Mediterranean security. It is in many ways been a kind of stepchild of security concerns in the East. That continues. I mean, not that the security concerns in the East aren't very real, but, there is a balance to be had there. They're of a very different kind. South, they're about migration. They're also sometimes about hard security, as they are in the Eastern Mediterranean. They're about this durable chaos. They're about many, many different things. At a time when resources are very, very difficult to come by and the burden sharing debate is increasingly difficult, I am a bit concerned about that. There's a concern about getting financial solidarity to deal with this crisis in Southern Europe in particular, but there's also a concern about dealing with some of the hard and soft security consequences that could come from it. So it's not to say that we won't, in a sense, get our act together in Europe and as allies to do it, but the conditions are not as good as they might have been if we were all feeling prosperous and secure.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian. I'd like to take one last question that we can also use as a closing statement for all the speakers. So I'll address it to the minister, but then I will ask the other speakers if they'd like to comment. So the question is from Johannes de Jong, and it asks, does the analysis of the minister mean that he needs to enhance the cooperation with all the good-willing actors around Turkey? In other words, Greece has cooperation now with Israel and Egypt. Shall EU and Greece expand cooperation with Jordan, Syria, and Iraq, for example? So, Minister, floor is yours.
It's an easy answer. I think that if we want Europe to play an influential role in a very sensitive, I would say vital for the international security region as the Eastern Mediterranean, Europe has to expand to the extent possible a system of alliances and a system of cooperation, not to be oriented against anybody and against Turkey. But this would be a means to enhance and strengthen Europe's geopolitical role in a very sensitive area. So I would very much advocate in favor of expanding our network of cooperation with the regions, with the countries of the region.
you, Minister. Secretary General, would you like to comment on that as well?
Absolutely agree. I have been advocating many years in the EPP, and finally we have enhanced cooperation inside the EPP with parties from these countries, from some of these countries where you can find some kind of parliamentary system. To tell you that it is essential. And in those countries, and specifically in conflict areas, they want the European Union to be present. They trust the European Union and the way European Union handles crisis. The problem is, I always said, nation states like Spain, Italy, France, these countries, they have memories about colonial past. So they are not so open in this kind of relation, or, they have some, let's say, remembrance about the past. But the European flag is very well received. I have seen this many times. And when you come to negotiate with the European flag, they react in a very positive manner. So we have, yes, to take that opportunity, and the European Union has to enlarge. We have very good contact with Caucasus, with the Balkans, which is a hot area for the European Union, very important also in this respect. The Balkans are essential. But the Eastern Mediterranean, of course, and please, I only wanted to mention one country in particular, because I am chairman of the delegation of relations between the European Union and Israel in the European Parliament. I think that Israel is crucial for many things at this point, and we have to enhance. And right now, the communication between Israel and the European Union can be much better. We are waiting now for the new government in Israel to be formed. If there is a government, we all hope so. I don't care if it's Netanyahu or whoever it is. We have to approach again, because I think that a good relation between the European Union and Israel is essential also to bring clarity to many of these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tono. And now, Ian, I'd like to pass the floor to you for your comments on this question.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I can only say I agree with the comments that were already made. I think it's simply very important to do. Turkey is a critical partner, actually, for Europe across a lot of different issues, but it's not the only one. And I think, for reasons that go beyond hedging, it's important to have these new geometries. It's important to energy security. It's important to tourism, to bring tourism back after this crisis to the region where, these countries that you mentioned are all so dependent, both in Southern Europe and in the Southern Mediterranean, on tourism. And to bring this back in a way that helps everybody is extremely important. Maritime security, the list goes on. So, yes, I don't see a downside to this. And I think if it's done well, it can only enhance all of our interests. And let me thank you again. It's been great to be part of this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ian. And maybe, Minister, just to finish off, can you please briefly tell us, of course, the coronavirus has had a huge impact on all the countries in Europe and all over the world, but what impact has it had maybe on the reception facilities, and how hard did it make the situation that you're facing now?
Of course, the coronavirus pandemic added a new, very serious dimension in an already very complicated and difficult situation to be handled. That is, we have two crises at the same time, and they combine to each other. Because now, for instance, we have to handle, let's say, the new arrivals of migrants in a new way, because they have to be led to a quarantine place. And the rhythm, the pace, and the number of the new arrivals cannot be predicted. So, for instance, you can have the day one, an arrival of 20 people, and 3 days afterwards, an arrival of 10 people, and then of 50 people. And all of them, in an ideal situation, should go in separate quarantine places. That means that it adds a new task, a new effort to our government. Because if we want to tackle this issue, we will need many places for quarantine people. And this should be done under the time pressure of the pandemic. So I just refer to this to show the new dimension an already difficult problem can acquire. So far, we have no incidents of coronavirus inside the camps in the islands. Because, you know, islands it's a curious thing. They are protected and vulnerable at the same time. If they are well protected, the virus cannot spread to an island if you don't have new arrivals, either from the mainland or from other places. If you control the arrivals, then most probably you will avoid to have the pandemic transmitted. But in case you have, for instance, one case, then one island can become very vulnerable. So this is the situation we are coping with. We have started implementing the necessary measures for social distancing because we need to protect two populations, the residents in the camps and the local population of the islands. It's not because we want to create a ghetto, but this is out of our sense of responsibility that we need to keep these two populations apart, to protect both of them, not because we have a discriminatory behavior vis-a-vis the migrants. So in any case, it's a very complicated challenge. And let me go back to one of the issues that I have deep in my heart, European borders. Could you imagine that if in our borders in Evros, we have European flags throughout, along the borders, in the fence that we have been obliged to build, and with the interest that the events had acquired at the beginning of March, I think that only the presence of the European flags could have been a dissuasive factor for Turkey to push people to cross illegally the borders, because the images disseminated around the world would have been people coming from Turkey or under the encouragement of Turkey illegally violating European borders. The message would have been very strong. And probably this is something that we are going to do in case Turkey has not come to the right conclusions from the recent events.
Thank you, Minister. I think we're coming to the end of our discussion. So I'd like once again to thank the speakers very much for lending their time and for being here with us to offer their expertise on this very important topic. I'd like to thank our online viewers for being active, for staying with us. And please follow us on social media. The Martin Center is always ready to offer new products on the latest developments. And more importantly, everyone stay safe, stay home, and stay informed. Thank you again.